Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. 5,000 years of wisdom on demand. Get your first month for only 99 cents. Visit Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. The Paranormal Podcast is also brought to you by The Mysteries Cruise with Micah Hanks, Rosemary Ellen Guiley, and little old me. Reserve your cabin with only a $50 deposit for a limited time only. Go to mysteriescruise.com, that's mysteriescruise.com, and let's sail away.
This is the Paranormal Podcast with Jim Harold.
Welcome to the Paranormal Podcast. I am Jim Harold and so glad to be with you once again. And if you like the show, may I humbly request that you rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen, whether that's on iTunes or Apple Podcasts in terms of their app on the iPhone or the iPad, or whatever different app you may use. If there's a place to favorite or subscribe, please do that because that really helps us and shows these different companies and directories that they should feature our show and more people should find out about it. I would really appreciate it because there are more and more podcasts being introduced all the time. And to stay out front like we are, we need to keep getting that publicity, and we can get that if you say, hey, I like this show, I subscribed, I rated it, put up 2 or 3 sentences why I love it. I would really appreciate it. And today is another example of some fantastic guests we've been able to get. First up will be Varla Ventura. She's going to talk about Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings, a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. And always enjoy visiting with Varla. She always has such interesting information and really, really a lot of insight. And then we have a new guest. We've never had her on, but she is equally interesting, Jennifer Weigel. She is a journalist who has tackled the topic of psychics, healers, and mediums, a journalist, a road trip, and voices from the other side. So we have a power-packed doubleheader for the Paranormal Podcast today, and I think you're going to enjoy it. And here it is. Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings. Those are the subjects today because we have the perfect person to talk about those things, Varla Ventura. She is the author of the new book, Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings, a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. Now, you recall she's been on the program for some of her other books, including Banshees, Werewolves, Vampires, and Other Creatures of the Night. Among the Mermaid, she's also had books, The Book of the Bizarre and Beyond Bizarre, and she can often be found lurking about the deep, dark woods and lakes of Minnesota on the hunt for mushrooms, magical herbs, and the elusive little men of legend. And you can visit her online at varlaventura.net. Varla, welcome to the program today.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here again.
I love this. Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings. What inspired it?
Well, I'd been working on the Banshee book, the Banshees, Werewolves, and Vampires, and the Banshee section especially, I had stumbled into a lot of really unusual lore that I had not, as a lifelong reader of fairy tales and folklore, I had stumbled upon some things and some creatures that I was not entirely familiar with, and some terms I didn't know, and amazing, creepy stories. And so, because some of the Banshee information, a Banshee is considered actually of the fairy mound and part of the fairy realm, even though it sort of operates more on the ghost spectrum in some regards. But in doing that, all of these creatures are sort of, inextricably linked. So you start reading about the Banshee, and then the next thing you know, this person's giving their account of their Pookah encounter. And so I kind of kept making notes of that. And then after we completed the Banshee book, the publisher, I said, just so you know, I've got a whole bunch more information. And we actually did an ebook series of shorts about some of these creatures. And there was just so much to say and so many interesting things. So I convinced them that we should do another book, and they agreed, and here we are.
Now, it's interesting here. You say in the book, if you think fairies are merely delicate beings that follow you about on gossamer wings, you are in for quite a shock. I thought fairies were all sweetness and light. Have I been misled?
You have been terribly, grossly misled. I have to say my book must come with a warning. It is not for young children or fans of Tinkerbell. Now that's not to say that there isn't a place for that kind of fairy, and that there are. It's not that all fairies are malicious and evil, but there are fairies that, do operate, in the garden and can help things grow and can, they live among the flowers and things of that nature. But that's not really the kind of fairy that I found or that I talk about in this book. I talk more about some of the things that are out there lurking in the dead of night, waiting to trick you up as you stumble home along the dirt road, or the things that, steal things from your desk when you're not looking, or clean your kitchen as long as you're not lazy, and all manner of sort of tricks and cunning. And there seems to constantly be this pull between humans and fairies constantly trying to get the better of humans, and humans trying to capture that magic and the gold or the treasures or the abundance of the fairy kingdom, and the fairies consistently over the years outwitting mortal man.
I have to ask you this, because maybe some people have not heard of these. The title of the book is Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings. What is a Pookah?
So a Pookah is sort of the trickster fairy of the fairy kingdom, the most conniving. The Pookah is a shapeshifter and usually appears as a rabbit or a horse. Those are the most common. Occasionally you'll have accounts of Pookahs as like an eagle or some sort of large bird, and occasionally a dog of some kind. But generally the most common sightings are as a rabbit or a rabbit or a horse that sort of appears in the night with glowing, ferocious eyes. It actually reminds me, a lot of the accounts reminded me of, the legend of Sleepy Hollow and the Headless Horseman, and this sort of glowing-eyed kind of frightening creature that sort of, lifts you up and takes you on a wild ride. And the Pookah, one of the reasons the Pookah is considered the trickster is because the Pookah has a tendency to sort of only appear to one person at a given time. So it basically makes that person seem as if they're having a conversation with something invisible, or they're following something that isn't there. We have Harvey, Jimmy Stewart's Pookah, is this giant white rabbit. And everybody just dismisses him and thinks he's the town drunk, and they don't think he's real, and as the audience, we can see what he can see at least part of the time. And that's sort of like the Pookah sort of exists in that part of the play between fairies and people, and it'll trick you. It will often, again, prey on the town drunk, so no one believes you. You'll be walking home one minute, and then you have a Pookah encounter, and the next thing you know, it's dawn, and you're in a ditch, and you don't know how you got home, and no one believes you when you say it was a Pookah. They think you just had a few too many, and you just fell in the ditch on the way home. So the Pookah kind of on purpose will appear, but only to certain people, and then also will scare you. I mean, it's meant to scare you and kind of make you reevaluate your life and your choices at that moment, but it's rare that it causes any kind of long-term damage or harm. There are a few accounts of very weak-willed people who are driven to, cliff's edge by a Pookah, but generally it's just sort of a good, solid fright.
Now, changelings. Explain to us the concept of a changeling.
Yeah, well, changelings are actually kind of among the more frightening and confusing fairy creatures. A changeling is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a fairy switch. So it's a baby that is taken, and then a fairy baby is left in exchange. And there's all kinds of quite frightening instances of people waking up and realizing that their newborn now looks like a fairy, or noticing that the baby is missing and the baby's being carted off, or just sort of noticing something strange about your child. They're sort of eating you out of house and home, and kind of this voracious appetite, and they're growing at a really great rate. And, there's several old stories of these kind of things where, the mother and father don't see it, but everybody else in the village is like, oh, it's a changeling. Like, that's not a regular baby. And sometimes you do have occasionally like more of like an older person, an adult, or like a teen or something like that will be sort of lured into the fairy kingdom, and then a fairy will be sent out to take their place, and you'll find it might be somebody with like amazing artistic or musical ability that seems sort of ethereal and out of this world. And it used to be said that person was a changeling. So you have kind of the fairy that appears in the human world, and then of course the human that gets taken to the fairy world, where of course it's spoiled and treated as royalty.
Now, I have to ask you, and I've asked this about other topics you've done, is this all just kind of lore in the sense of fairy tales that people made up in your view, or do you think that these different types of creatures have some root in reality, whether it's reality today, they still exist, or maybe did they exist at one time? Do you think that there's something at its root to all of this?
Yeah, I think both. I definitely think that there are a lot of these sort of fairy tales that are cautionary tales that are, there to keep the children closer to the hearth and, stay out of the bog because Jenny Greenteeth is going to reach in and pull you in. So there's definitely like a certain element of that, the cautionary tale. And you see that in lore and legends around the world, that's a way of kind of keeping people closer to the group and not wandering astray in the night, especially in a time when wild animals and predators were out there in much more abundance, and we didn't have, electricity, and we could switch on a floodlight when we heard something rattling around in our front yard. But I also think that there's a great deal of truth at the root. I mean, I think anytime you have people from around the world or, from, even across the country just telling stories about kind of similar things, and I think you'll find in Ireland still to this day the strong connection to the fairy and to sort of the little people and the other world is very strong, and it's not viewed as okay, this is real and this is not real, but you can talk to people who have had experiences themselves or their father or their grandfather did, and many of the shorter stories that I included in my book are from collections from people like T. Crofton Croker or William Butler Yeats, who traveled around the countryside and recorded some of the stories and the encounters. So I think while, there's certainly an element of any of these stories that evolve as cautionary tales, at its root, I feel that there's, I tend to believe the what other people might refer to as a myth as not being true. I look at myths more as something that hold a place.
Well, it is really an interesting conversation. We have a great guest to talk about Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings, the complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. That is her new book, Varla Ventura, and we'll be back right after this. The Paranormal Podcast is brought to you by Gaia, the streaming TV service dedicated to exploring the cutting edge of metaphysics, ancient wisdom, and the unexplained. And they have this great deal where you can get your first month for only 99 cents, and I'm going to tell you about it. Now, I have been saying for the last several months, if you're a Paranormal Podcast fan, you need to check out Gaia. And it's true, because the topics that we cover are the same types of topics that they cover on Gaia, but in video. So this brings up a whole new vista. And I know if you're like me, you're a big streaming fan, you love to watch movies and TV shows on demand. But the good thing is that the great thing is that Gaia is the streaming TV service that doesn't deliver the other stuff. It really hones in on the topics that we love, the same kind of topics you'll hear on the Paranormal Podcast. They really have no competition because nobody else does what they do. For example, if you were a Gaia subscriber, some of the shows that you could watch this week, well, what about this? Cosmic Disclosure, hosted by David Wilcock and Corey Good. David and Corey this week Astral Projection and Our Place in the Universe with William Tompkins. George Norrie, Beyond Belief, Superhuman Potential. He talks to Ben Stewart, who says that the seeds of our superhumanism have already been planted within each of us. That sounds interesting. Then Mark Mirabello, who has been on our programs, joins Regina Meredith on Open Minds, and he talks about a traveler's guide to the afterlife. And that is just scratching the surface of some of the shows that you could watch if you were a subscriber. Now, over at Gaia, they've done the coolest thing for us, and I'm very appreciative of this. They've set up a special page, Gaia.com/Jim. That's Gaia.com/Jim. That's a place where you can go, and they have a lot of little snippets of these different programs, so you can get a sense of what you're missing by not being on Gaia. And it's absolutely, that page is free to check out. And I'm literally just scrolling through it right now. It's got some great clips here. I'm looking at viewer questions into the Soul of Wisdom teachings. Let's see, what else do we have? A clip from that astral projection show that I talked to you about earlier. Let's see what else we have. The Law of One and the Secret Space Programs, Technological Salvation from Cosmic Disclosure, First Encounter for Cosmic Disclosure. Interesting one here, Remote Control Phenomena. So you can see this is really, really great stuff, and you can check that out all for free. Just go over to Gaia.com/Jim. And over on that page, should you want to take advantage of it, there's a little red button in the corner, upper right-hand corner, and if you click on Sign Up, and that helps me because that way they know where it came from, you can actually get your first month for only 99 cents, and that's at Gaia.com/Jim, Gaia.com/Jim. It's like a video smorgasbord for consciousness studies, your one-stop shop. And I hope that you will check it out. Go over to Gaia.com/Jim. That's GAIA.com/Jim to see what's happening on the largest consciousness media streaming platform in the world. Thanks, Gaia. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. We're having a great conversation. She always is so interesting, and she writes on such interesting topics. I'm talking about Varla Ventura. Her latest is Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings, a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. What is one of your favorite fairy creatures?
Well, it's hard to pick one. I'm a big fan of the puka because I find it so amusing. I have sort of an inherent trickster in me, and I love playing pranks on my family and jokes on people. And so I love that idea of something sort of, existing just to kind of, mess with you. But I've become quite fond of the leprechaun. And it's because the leprechaun stories that I found and some of the descriptions of leprechauns, it kind of, you have this idea of what a leprechaun is, and it's this sort of like little guy, and he's got a red beard and his little belt and his hat, and it's just sort of like this comic thing. But there's this whole other element to the leprechaun, and I found some really wonderful stories. And the leprechauns also are quite tricksters. They are cobblers, so they're the cobbler of the fairy kingdom, which I did not know until I found, I believe it was this Welsh book that I was reading that had some lore, and it was pointing to a few different descriptions of leprechauns as they viewed them in Wales, and also the Welsh view of the Irish leprechaun. A few different spellings. Is a cobbler, loves fine fabric, and you can sort of bribe them with gifts like, beautiful silks and velvets. And is usually a bachelor, and you can, people used to try and find the leprechaun by the tapping of his cobbler bench. So that was a way that you would kind of be able to track him down. And then I just found a couple of really, really amusing stories that are classic leprechaun tales. There are 3 in the book, and each one of them is quite different. And one is about someone who sort of has great prosperity, and everybody thinks that he's hiding the leprechaun in the leprechaun's golden store, but he's really just a fairly pious guy who doesn't spend all his money at the pub, and he gets up early and he works. But instead of being admired for these traits, he is ostracized from the village because everybody's convinced that he's really got a leprechaun after all. And so it actually works against him. And then there's another great story about someone capturing the leprechaun. He's actually very cruel to the leprechaun right off the bat. He doesn't just capture him and say, okay, what I want the gold, I want your golden purse. He sort of ties him up, and he's kind of mean to him, like sort of poking him and prodding him. And then the leprechaun says, well, you don't want the pot of gold. What you want is this golden purse that always will have one gold coin in it. And he convinces this guy to let him go in exchange for this magic purse. And then the magic purse, of course, does have one gold coin in it. And so the guy goes on down to the pub, and he has this fantastic, drinks on me, dinner on me. And, the barkeep's kind of eyeballing him like, this guy never has any money. What's going on here? And at the very end, he reaches in to pull out, the money. He says, no, I caught a leprechaun, and I have the golden purse. And he puts down the coin, and then he reaches in to get the next coin, and it's empty. And of course, everybody just bursts into laughter. And it's like, oh, he's been outwitted by the leprechaun again. And the leprechaun's off back into the hills, laughing all the way because he outsmarted this pretty mean guy. So, I just love the kind of, it's a lot of the classic ideas of leprechauns, but with there's a little bit more of a twist there. And there's another story about a man who has this sort of leprechaun who actually carries him off into the night on Halloween night. And it reminds me a lot of, there's an old fairy tale about a princess who falls asleep and these dogs, she's carried in the night to this place where there's a dog with eyes as big as saucers. And I can't remember the name of that story, but in this leprechaun story, this man is carted off on Halloween night to this magical ball. And this is actually a leprechaun story, which completely surprised me because as I was reading it, it seemed like many other fairy tales I had read, but it was this leprechaun who was actually was kind of helping him and was a very benevolent spirit for him. So there was a lot of surprises for me in reading some of these things because, like anyone, I had certain ideas about what a leprechaun was, what a fairy is, what a brownie is, things like that.
Now, leprechauns are interesting. I mean, obviously, they're extremely well known. And another thing that kind of interests me, I actually had a caller to my campfire show say when he was young that he thought he saw a leprechaun. And I think he must have been around 10 or 11. And this would have been, he was a little bit more mature. So I think this would have been towards the late 60s. And the interesting thing he said is that, for years he kind of, if I recall correctly, kind of beat himself up about it and said, I didn't see a leprechaun. And then years later he was talking with his brother, and his brother claimed that he saw the same thing. When we're talking about these different creatures, are there modern day sightings? Because we always think about this as something of yesteryear, but do we have any current reports?
Oh yeah. A lot of what I have in the book are not real current. It's, I focus a lot on the older folklore and some of the old legends and stories. But in any time with this kind of subject, once you start talking about it, people start reaching out to you. And just in the last 3 weeks, I've had 2 people call into a show talking about an encounter. And I've gotten probably half a dozen emails about people describing something very much like either a little brownie or some other kind of little elfin creature they saw in the woods. Someone even sent me some photos that it certainly, it looks just like you're looking at a forest, and there were just a couple things in there that looked kind of flesh toned. And so I think there are modern sightings. I think that even to this day, a really good modern example is the community of Findhorn in Scotland. If you're at all familiar with that, in the 1970s, they became known as the spiritual community, and they had this very rugged limestone terrain. And by making offerings to elementals, to the fairy kingdom, they were able to produce incredible crops. And that community still exists today. They're a spiritual community. You look on their website, they don't talk a lot about fairies or anything like that. But I do have an old book that belonged to my mother that was published in the 70s called The Magic of Findhorn, and that tells the story. So you definitely have that modern day kind of, leave a little offering. Someone actually told me recently about a family that they knew that claimed that they had a little house brownie that as long as they left a bit of wine at night in a nice glass, that this thing cleaned their house. I mean, and this was like 2 years ago they were saying this. So there's definitely a lot of encounters and sightings and experiences that people have. And I think, almost always it's going to be when you're in nature, when you're, maybe even in your garden, and you may not always actually see something head on. I think it's similar to ghosts in that way. Some people actually see ghosts and have a paranormal encounter. Other people feel them. Other people can sense them. Some people can smell them. So just like with anyone in any kind of, second sight, there's a lot of variations. And usually, the most important thing I take away from those stories is that if somebody really believes that they had that encounter and really, did possibly have a glimpse into the fairy kingdom, they should really count themselves very lucky because, fairies are pretty elusive and they definitely, only show themselves when they want to be seen. And so a person that does have an experience like that is gifted and does have something, that the Irish would call the second sight.
When it comes to these things, you kind of almost something that's funny. If you look at it in popular culture, the leprechaun, for example, is always kind of a very funny kind of character and those kind of things. But it certainly goes much, much deeper. What surprised you in doing this book? I mean, obviously you're well steeped in all of this, but what caught you by surprise?
Well, one of the things that kind of caught me by surprise, and I was working on the section about the leprechaun. And I was thinking about the tapping of the cobbler's bench, and I thought, why does that reminds me of Tommyknockers. That reminds me of sort of the spirits that are in the mine that especially Cornish miners would talk about, that would lead them toward gold or lead them away from a cave-in, or occasionally, if you didn't make good with them, you would not find you would never hit the vein, and you would, possibly even fall victim to a mining accident, which was really common. And these are spirits that were really well known in Cornwall. And then there were a lot of Cornish miners that came to the United States throughout the country. In the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, we had a lot of copper mining and a lot of Cornish miners there. In California, they came for the gold. I mean, there were other people, but the Cornish miners brought this idea of Tommyknockers with them. And so I was kind of reading a couple of Tommyknocker stories, and it's again a very similar thing where you will be helped, but the fairy kingdom requires a certain payment. With Tommyknockers, the most successful miners were the ones that would set aside, basically 25% of whatever they made went to the Tommyknockers, and then they would never run out. But as soon as you went back on that bargain or you became greedy, again, this is a very common story throughout fairy tales and allegories, throughout time. As soon as you become greedy, you kind of ruin it. And as I'm reading about these Tommyknockers, I found 2 or 3 descriptions that were describing these Tommyknockers not like the elfin creatures, but more like a dwarf. And so then I was like, okay, so now we have the idea of dwarves as miners and dwarves as mountain spirits. And so then I started looking at dwarves, and I actually sort of found this kind of amazing thread between the word coblin, which the word cobbler is also from that. So I'm thinking about, here's this leprechaun, he's the cobbler. Here's a coblin, which is sort of the Welsh word, and then became known as a goblin. And then you also have this connection to the idea of, there are occasionally stories about coblins, and those stories sound identical to a description of a dwarf. So it's kind of a lot of those words, because there's different cultures and different languages, they get, you might call it a goblin, and then in some cases a goblin is something very dark and scary, and in other places a goblin is a hobgoblin, and that's a helpful spirit, and it's more like a brownie. So you have similar creatures that have different names and different word origins, and you can, it's just like the way in the United States, if you want to have, a soda, you might, or maybe you're going to have a pop, or maybe you're in the South, you say you want a Coke, and you get just like a big ice cream sundae. So it's like everybody calls it something different. And you see that, and that was really interesting to me, was sort of the way in some ways it was the same creature just described the same, but in very similar behavior and similar stories and experiences people had had, but a different name. And just trying to kind of weave that together in a way that made sense in the book was really challenging, because I kept seeing all of these threads, and then I didn't know, sometimes I'd have to go back to the beginning, and I actually would move things in the book. And then when I sent it into my editor, I was like, okay, I moved this from chapter 5 to chapter 2. So if it seems disjointed, let me know. But all of a sudden I found something about hobgoblins that I had never read before. And of course that stuff all comes to you right at the last minute.
If you could pick one of these creatures, I know you said which ones were your favorites and things, but one specific one that you could kind of conjure up and spend some time with, which one would it be?
Oh, it probably would be a brownie, because they help you with housework.
I like
so
that.
Any of the creatures that help with housework, I mean, I'm happy to do my share. I'm happy to leave something every night for you, as long as, I get a little help. So, it'd be so nice to walk into my office and not have piles of papers and books scattered everywhere and, all manner of things. I blame it on my cat. The cat knocked it over. But it's really just, my method. So I would love to have an ongoing relationship with a kind of a domestic fairy and the thing is the fairies, apart from changelings and the fairies that sort of like work to trick specifically children, fairies in general are very fond of children. And in fact, that's why they go to great lengths to try and capture them. But not all fairies are after them. But children have a natural ability to see and understand and accept fairies, just as with other paranormal phenomenon. It's like, oh yeah, I saw a ghost, whatever. It was Grandpa sitting on my bed. And there's the kind of like that veil is thinner. And sometimes I say there's, the three main ways that you can access the fairy kingdom, the ability to see them. Children can do it without thinking about it. People with certain natural psychic abilities can do it with some effort. People of a magical ilk, and then drunks can kind of do it at random. So can be something that you can invite in, but you definitely have to be willing to keep up your end of the bargain, because you strike up a bargain with a fairy, then you've got to maintain your end of the bargain, and you can't get lazy and you can't get tired. I don't know what happens if you go on vacation. I mean, you have something feed your cat. Do you have to have something come in and feed your brownie? I don't. Oh, and also every night I need you to go in my house and leave a glass of wine in the specific windowsill in a crystal goblet, and you're not to drink any of it. I mean, can you imagine the instructions for your housekeeper?
That's a good point. I like that. Well, I gotta tell you, this is a lot of fun. If you're into this kind of lore and these kind of things, I highly recommend, all of Varla's books, but this one in particular. It's Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings, a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. Varla, how can we connect to the book and everything else you do?
You can visit my website. It's varlaventura.net, and I have, a few excerpts from the book there. There's links to buy the books, different contests and giveaways that we're running with the publisher, and just different kind of fun things that are happening. So also sometimes, weird news, or people will share an encounter with me, and I'll get permission to things that didn't make it into the book. I'll get permission to publish that on the website. So it can be a lot of fun, and you can find the books anywhere books are sold. So if you've got a local bookstore, you can ask them to order it if they don't already have them in stock. All my books are in print and widely available.
Well, the book is Fairies, Pookahs, and Changelings, a complete guide to the wild and wicked enchanted realm. And our guest has been Varla Ventura. Varla, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
I always enjoy speaking with Varla, and I think you should check her new book out. And I think you should check this interview out, Jennifer Weigel, and here it is. Psychics, healers, and mediums. It's a question that I frankly struggle with it. I've been doing these podcasts for 12 years. Obviously, I kind of bill myself as a skeptical believer. I don't believe everything, but I do believe something is going on. But sometimes I personally have questions about psychics. Are they real? Is it all made up, or is it kind of a mix? And we have a great guest who's had her own journey in this regard, and she has a new book out called Psychics, Healers, and Mediums, a Journalist, a Road Trip, and Voices from the Other Side. Our guest is Jennifer Weigel, and she is an award-winning broadcast journalist based in Chicago. She's won an Emmy for her on-camera reporting for CBS and has also worked for ABC, NBC, WGN, and WLS Radio. And her real love is adding humor to life's tragedies through her writing. She's written 3 other books, including I'm Spiritual, Damn It, which became a podcast she hosts on WGN+. And you can find her online at jenweigel.com. Jennifer, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Now, I think this journey kind of got started with the passing of your father. When you think about a journalist, you kind of think about, well, like that old Dragnet saying, just the facts, man. You know, I just want the facts, not interested in all this frou-frou stuff. How did you get started on this, and why did you decide to take this journey?
Well, definitely my father passing away at the age of 56 was part of it. I actually lost 3 people close to me, my father being one of them, within a span of 5 years. And when you watch someone take their last breath, you really are left sort of stymied and stumped, right? And for me, as a journalist and as somebody who was always kind of curious about the paranormal, but I never really took it too seriously. And then when it became personal, it was like, wait a minute, what's really going on here? Because I've been introduced to the likes of James Van Praagh. He came through Chicago back in 1999 after Talking to Heaven became a bestseller, and he had Reaching to Heaven, his second book. And nobody in Chicago wanted to touch him with a 10-foot pole, and I convinced my producer, because he had a New York Times bestselling book, Talking to Heaven, that we should have conversation. But this was before my dad had died, and he wound up bringing through some stuff in an era when Google was not yet formed and emails were just starting. He pulled some stuff out of the sky that I thought, that's so interesting. But, you know, everybody's got a dead grandparent. So, again, I would always come up with excuses. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like I could always find a reason for it. Like, oh, yeah, sure. Everyone's got a dead grandparent. Everyone's got some jewelry from a dead relative, you know, blah, blah, blah. But when my dad passed away, I was kind of stuck in grief, which happens when you lose someone very close to you. And grief is a really pricey business. And when you're in grief, you'll pay just about anybody. And I was watching myself kind of go through this and other people that I knew who were in grief. And I thought that maybe I could set out and investigate these psychics or mediums and then maybe just report back to people so they could not get ripped off. And that was sort of what, you know, started it for me. But then, of course, as I went down the journey, I was left scratching my head more times than I can even, you know, explain. So I just kept on asking and kept trying. I'm now finding that I'm trying to explain the unexplainable because you, like you say, just the facts, ma'am. I want my facts to be someone I can call on a landline, you know, or touch in person and, you know, put my hand on their shoulder. I don't want my source to be someone you're yapping at the ceiling.
Now, I looked at the list of people that you interviewed for this, and it seems like each one of them has a different chapter in your kind of experience with them, and some of them have actually been on our programs. How did you select the people that are featured in this book?
The people who said yes. To be quite honest, I mean, I really reached out to the ones I was most passionate about. Thomas John and I had done many shows together. We were introduced by our publisher, the Manhattan Medium. And when I met with him, you know, my publisher called me and said, have I got a medium for you? And I thought, if I had $1 for every time I've heard that. And I'm sure you've gotten that too. You know, it's like, yeah, sure. How are they different? And so I wanted everybody, though, also to have a little bit of a different skill set. And so I reached out to the people that I thought were a little different, right? So we've got Thomas John, who's a medium who you know, can sometimes see some psychic things, apparently, because our dead loved ones have opinions about what we're going to do. And then someone like Paul Selig, who is a channeler, right? And he stands in front of a group, and his voice changes tone, and his eyes change color. And I mean, I've never seen anything like that in my life. I couldn't wait to meet Paul Selig because that guy was a professor at NYU for 25 years before he got into this stuff. It's not like he came out of the womb, you know, knowing he was going to do this work. Same with Carolyn Mays. You know, she was minding her own business as an editor and a journalist, you know, sitting in the parking lot, smoking a cigarette, drinking black coffee, and somebody walks by her and she suddenly knows why they're sick. She becomes this medical intuitive out of nowhere. Didn't ask for the gift. It just showed up. So I like the variety pack. And then there's, of course, the Bodines who were hit with this as a family when Echo Bodine, the oldest sister, was 17, and Michael, the youngest, was about 7 or 8. So I just found it so, I wanted everybody to be a little bit different, if you know what I mean, so that it wasn't like cookie-cutter experiences, because everyone's going to have a different reaction to people and how they work. And everybody in this book, I'm proud to say, works very differently. And it was really neat for me to encounter them and then also bring with me a stranger along the way that they couldn't Google ahead of time. So we could, because they could Google me all day long.
Sure.
But they're not going to be able to Google my friend Lisa or Margie or whoever came along.
Now, how did you keep grounded with this? Because this is emotional stuff, and as it kind of reminds me of a physician. You want to be compassionate to your patients, but you have to maintain a certain professional distance, a certain arm's length. How did you do that and try to remain at least somewhat impartial in doing this study?
Well, it's hard sometimes when you have someone sitting next to you who tragically lost a child to not get emotionally invested. And that's why I actually left the news business. I couldn't stand on an overpass, talk about a tragic, fiery car crash where 6 people died with a straight face and say, back to you. I just couldn't. I'm a human being. And so I do think, though, when you're gathering evidence, it's really important to take into account all of the factors. Because sometimes when people are in grief, they're willing to hold on to anything. Oh, you have a man on the other side. Oh, it's actually a baby, but that's okay. I'll take it. You have to go, wait a minute. Let's look at the facts here. Let's not just jump on, and then there are the other people that take it to the other extreme where somebody is standing in front of them saying, I have your son here. They're showing me the dress you wore at the funeral and the thing you put in his pocket and the casket and this and that and that. And then somebody's like, she could have told that to anybody who's lost a kid. It's like, what? I don't think so. So I saw that too. I mean, I would see some people that are just so with their arms folded. There's being skeptical and then there's being cynical. And cynics actually shut down, I think, all receptors to any new information. I mean, that's like scientifically proven. Think about it. Look at our polar climate right now with our political views. You cannot convince Aunt Tilly to believe what you believe at Thanksgiving. It's not going to happen. So there's some people that are just shut down to it completely. And that was frustrating also. I had that experience with a couple of these people. So it sort of ran the gamut a little bit, but I was there as this sort of outside voice looking in because I don't have as much of an investment emotionally when it's not my relative, that has passed. I, unfortunately lost my dad and 2 other very close relatives. However, that was 15, 16 years ago. So with enough time, that emotional charge is a little bit less, if that makes any sense.
Why do you think that people who work in this field, psychics and mediums and so forth, why do you think they get such a bad rap?
Well, the word psychic alone just makes you think somebody with a turban on their head and a dead chicken around their neck, right? Mm-hmm. And the Bible doesn't do the psychics any favors either because they're talking about gypsies and seers. And a lot of people, and I write about this in my introduction, tell me I'm going straight to hell for even doing this research. But what they're not doing is they're not reading the Bible because the gifts of the Spirit in Corinthians are you developing your gifts. Greater gifts than these you will have. That's what Jesus said. So when I talked to a Lutheran minister who told me that the Bible has all sorts of instances where mediumship is validated, I had a Roman Catholic priest email me with examples of where mediumship encounters take place. The resurrection is a mediumship encounter. So I guess the real beef that those with the Bible have with psychics and mediums is if you put them above your relationship to God or Jesus, which nobody should. And I interviewed these mediums, and Thomas John said, look, nobody should put a medium or a psychic ahead of their relationship to the divine, period. I agree with that. He doesn't do that, and the really good mediums and psychics don't do that either. They really acknowledge the fact that this is a gift that's coming through them, not from them, right? And that it's not about them, and their ego should stay out of the message delivery. And that is when I can tell somebody is the real deal is when their ego takes a backseat. And so it's the people that make it about them and make it about their delivery that are losing sight. I don't know, has that been something you've ever experienced in your work and in your interviews when the people who make it about them sort of lose sight of the fact that they're trying to service the divine.
Well, honestly, that's kind of a turnoff for me when people start talking, well, I did this and I did that and I did the other thing. Then I start to say, well, I don't know if I necessarily believe you. You know, for me, it's kind of a thing. And another thing and I want to ask your opinion about this, and I won't give my view on it. I'll give you my view after you say yours. But some people say, well, you know, for example, a psychic, if they're asking for money, they're a fraud. What do you think about that?
Oh, please. Doctors ask for money. Mechanics ask for money. Accountants ask for money. If you have an ability to see something, you have a gift that somebody else doesn't have. A basketball player who can make 1 million baskets has a gift over me. I can't make one basket if I try. So if somebody has a gift that they are using to help people, now if they're walking, you know, if somebody walks in the door, though, however, and says, you have to give me $1,000 or we can't continue, or there are dark spirits around that are haunting you. I mean, there's a difference between somebody who's using their gift for bad and someone who's using their gift to heal. And I can scope those people out in about 30 seconds. If they tell me I have to buy 16 different, you know, devices and 5 candles and, you know, 3 blankets and 50 crystals, or I'm going to be tainted for the rest of, you know, no. That means you're a scam artist, and I don't want anything to do with you. Does that make sense?
No, that's actually exactly what I was going to say. I wanted to get your take on. I don't think there's anything wrong with them taking money within reason, just like any other service. You know, if you take a place take your car to a garage and they charge you $40 to change your oil, and then they're not nickeling and diming you and saying, well, you got this wrong, and every time you bring it, you have 10 other things wrong. You know, it's like any other profession. There's people who are good, and there are people who are not so good. It was funny, actually. I interviewed Thomas John, and I asked him something along the lines of like, well, you know, what do you think about people when they, and this is paraphrasing, but the idea is when they think psychic automatically means charlatan. And I don't know if it's the way I ask it, but I think it was a little put off by it. And he said something like, well, I'm sure there are radio hosts who are charlatans. It's like, you've worked in the business. Now, so I thought that was but I agree with you. I think if people are asking for reasonable fees and it's not like holding your grief hostage and those kind of things, I think it's fine. I think when you start to say, you know, things like, well, if you want to talk to Aunt Millie again, you've got to clear out your savings account and give it all to me. You know, it's like anything else. You have to use your head with it and not just your heart.
And I think also too, like some of the preachers we see on TV that basically say, if you don't see, Jesus isn't going to come into your house. You know, shame on you, all those healers that do that. I mean, really, we can sit in our living room and contact source without reaching out to a psychic or Joel Osteen. You know, so I'm frustrated by people who get mad at the money piece, but if people are doing it with respect, like you say, then I think it's definitely legitimate.
Well, our guest is Jennifer Weigel. The book is Psychics, Healers, and Mediums, a Journalist, a Road Trip, and Voices from the Other Side. We're going to talk to her about maybe a couple of her favorite vignettes from the book right after this on the Paranormal Podcast. I'm excited because I'm going on a cruise this November, but I'm even more excited because you can come with me, because I'm talking about not just any cruise. I'm talking about the Mysteries Cruise. It's November 8th through the 13th, 2017, on the Crown Princess. So you know it's a beautiful ship. But even better is the company that will be joining me. My good buddy Micah Hanks, of course you know him as an author, a podcaster, a musician, an adventurer, a Renaissance man, my co-host when we were doing the Paranormal Report, and we remain good friends to this day. And then one of the people that I admire most in this field, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. She's written more books on the paranormal than you can shake a stick at, and she really knows so many different areas. I was just talking to somebody in the UFO field, and she was at a conference for that, and she's done so much with ghosts and the jinn and spirits, and just she knows her stuff. So she's really one of the people I admire the most. So I'm so honored to be selected to be on this august panel that will be joining you on this Mysteries Cruise. Now, not only do we have great speakers, we have a great ship with the Crown Princess, we have a great destination. And we're going to be going to the ports of call like Grand Turk, Turks and Caicos, and we're going to be departing from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And the actual cruise itself is going to be November 8th through the 13th. But I've saved the best part for last because right now, between April 17th and May 2nd, there is a tremendous 2-week sale going on for a reduced deposit of $50 per person plus an onboard coupon booklet that has a value of $500. Plus, if you book and use my promo code JHMAY, JHMAY, and you end up going on the cruise, you will get a free autographed copy of one of my campfire books. I want to meet you, and I want to meet you on this cruise. I've been on a cruise before, and I got to tell you, in terms of relaxation, there is nothing like it. You truly have the chance to get away from it all. And what's nice about this is you'll have all those great components of a cruise, getting it away from it all, looking at the beautiful sand and the surf and the excursions that we're going to do. But also, you're going to be able to plug into all of this great information from Rosemary and Micah and to me too. So I hope to meet you there. We're going to have a great time. I love the way they do this because what they do is they have the speakers rotate dinner with the cruisers. So we could even have dinner when we're on the cruise. I just think it is such a neat idea. And I'm so thankful to the folks over at Holiday Maker Travel, Mike and Wendy, for making it possible. So without further ado, what you need to do right away is go over to mysteriescruise.com. That's mysteriescruise.com. Put down your $50 deposit. You get that onboard coupon booklet and put in that code JHMAY to get a autographed copy of one of my campfire books. And I'll see you there. And we will cruise along. I'll see you on the Mysteries Cruise. Thanks, Holiday Maker Travel. We're back on the Paranormal Podcast. Our guest is Jennifer Weigel. She has the new book out, Psychics, Healers, and Mediums, a Journalist, a Road Trip, and Voices from the Other Side. Jennifer, I do want to ask you about this because one that I do worry about, maybe more than the other categories, are that of healers. Now, I've heard people say, throw away your cancer drugs, I will heal you, and that really scares me. Now, when somebody says, you know, these things are supplements, don't get rid of your traditional, you know, still follow the advice of your physician, but these things can be supplementary. That kind of makes sense to me. Where do you fall on that when somebody says that they can heal? Because that's life and death, and sometimes that scares me.
Yes, I think that people have to use the combo platter. You know, I'm a big fan of the combo platter using Western medicine and the other alternative modalities. In fact, when my dad was getting treatment for his brain cancer, we had the regular Cedars-Sinai, appointments, and then we would go over to the, quote, other building. It was this red building where they had the integrative medicine, and he would get reflexology, massage, Reiki, aromatherapy. He always felt better. He got some Qigong healing. The people in the East have been doing this for thousands of years, and we're just last to get on the bandwagon. I think a lot of our illnesses and our cancers come from misalignment, and our energy bodies are out of alignment. And they can be tuned up real quick with a quick acupuncture or massage or, even like a chiropractic adjustment. But even that, some people think is bizarre. So what they'll do is they'll eat the worst food on the planet and food with red dye number whatever and high fructose corn syrup and the worst diet. And then they're like, why do I feel sick? I better go to the doctor. So I believe that healers I've experienced many of them, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, just like doctors. People say to me, well, what do you recommend? And I say, well, what's your ailment? Do you need a podiatrist or an ear, nose, and throat guy? And so for somebody to say, I can wave my hands across you and get rid of your cancer, I've seen some incredible healers before, but I always say to keep one toe in one pond and one toe in the other. I believe it was Sarah Fawcett at the end that was just chucking all of her traditional medicine to go with the homeopathic. Granted, I believe all of the medicines that we have somehow came from nature. And I have a lot of really wonderful healers that I know that dish out supplements that are part of their daily, what they take every single day because they want their container, right, their car to have the best gas possible. We treat our vehicles better than we treat our bodies, right? If our engine light goes on, we panic, we take it to the mechanic. But we don't treat our bodies that well. And I think that one comes with the other. So we cannot treat ourselves like crap and then expect to be running at full throttle, right? And so people go to healers as a last resort, and I think they should be part of your integrative weekly, MO. For example, Echo Bodine, when she was 17 years old, was told that she would take her, her whole family started experiencing these weird hauntings and things that go bump in the night. So the mom was kind of like freaking out. This is the 60s. They didn't have a section in Barnes & Noble for the paranormal back then, right?
No.
So she goes and asks around and finds a spiritualist church, in the basement of a regular church in Minneapolis, in the suburbs of Minneapolis. And she calls this lady, and the lady says, "Oh, hello, Mrs. Bodine. I've been expecting you." It's like cue Twilight Zone soundtracks, So she and Echo go to visit this woman, and the woman says, "You are going to develop your psychic gifts, as are 3 of your 4 children, and your daughter, Echo, is going to go home and heal her father's migraine with her hands. She has source coming through her hands, and she will be able to use it to help people heal." Now, Echo is like 17, working at the Howard Johnsons with a beehive hairdo. She's like, "This is really inconvenient. How am I going to go to the dance with Johnny if I have to go heal people?" And so, sure enough, they go home. Her dad is lying in bed with this awful migraine. Her hands get hot, like hot pokers, and she thinks, oh, boy. She goes up and says, "Dad, can I put my hands on your head to help your headache?" And he's like, "I don't care what you do. Just make it go away." And sure enough, she uses her healing abilities to heal her dad's migraine. He sits up and he goes, "Well, gosh, I'll be darned. Did you put some aspirin in that water?" He basically thought she had given him some aspirin against his will because it was that quick. And for those people out there that are listening that have experienced the hands-on sort of healing from Reiki or energy work or Qigong, I watched my dad go through Qigong treatments after he would come back from radiation therapy. But for a while, for his brain tumor, they wouldn't give him any more radiation because they were like, "There's nothing else we can do for you. There's just nothing else." They'd hit their limit. So he continued to go get Qigong, which is where this man named Dr. Zoe put his hands over my dad's head, and my dad felt incredible heat. And for 45 minutes, he would just lay there on the table. And they took a scan of his brain tumors, and they had shrunk 75%, and nobody could figure out why or how because the radiation stuff had stopped. So, how do you explain this? Well, you don't. You just believe or you don't believe. I'm not telling people to, throw in the towel, forget all your doctors, and go see, Dr. Zoe for some Qigong. But I'm saying it can't hurt. I think it's a wonderful accessory to your life that can help keep your engine, running like at its optimal ability, if that makes sense.
Now, we love stories on these shows. Do you have a couple of vignettes from the book, things that really kind of, even though you've been exposed to this now for a while and investigating it, that really were kind of jaw-dropping for you?
Oh, yeah, there are a lot of those. Let me see. I'll start with one of them was a personal story, again, with Thomas John. I was really kind of like, it's going to take a lot to surprise me. So right before I went into the meeting with him, I was on the phone with my real estate attorney, and I had just killed a deal for the sale of my house within 3 minutes of my going in to walk in and meet Thomas. And I looked up and I said, okay, if he brings up that, then I'll be impressed, right? So I sit down, and sure enough, he starts talking about my dad who had died and was a sportscaster, and my grandpa, his name was John, and my brother lives in St. Louis, and my sister lives in D.C., and all these things, you could find with a good search engine. So I was like, okay, sure, gotcha. And then he says, your dad is talking about real estate, and did you just kill a deal like today? And I was like,
oh, boy.
What? And he goes, yeah, your dad is like, don't do business with these people. Because it was an as-is sale, if people know what that is. It's basically you can't come back and say, I want the roof fixed or I want the electric redone. It was an as-is sale, but they wanted the roof fixed and the electric redone. And I said, what part of as-is do they don't understand? Kill the deal. And my attorney was like, what? And sure enough, Thomas brought that up. He said, your dad is saying, do not do business with these people. A better offer will come. And sure enough, he was right, and a better offer did come. So that was one of those instances where the medium tells you something psychically because your dead loved ones on the other side apparently have an opinion. Because as you know, not every medium is a psychic, and not every psychic can, claim to talk to dead people. So that was pretty interesting for me. Another instance was with, I would say, gosh, let me pick one. It's so hard. There were so many good ones. Conchetta Bertoldi, she is a riot, and if you haven't interviewed her, I highly recommend it. She wrote the best-selling book, Do Dead People Watch You Shower? And the other bestseller, Do Dead People Walk Their Dogs? She's just a hoot, and she's had the gift since she was about 15 years old. She came home, and in her room was just a party of dead people. Ghosts were everywhere, and they were having a great time. And she was panicked. She ran out. She called her dad and mom and said, I can't go to bed. Why? There's all these dead people in there, and they're having a party. So her dad then admits look, your grandpa had this gift. I don't have it, but obviously it skipped a generation to you. And what he always said was, is if you don't want them around, you just have to say, in the name of God, please go away. And they will go away. They have to listen to you. It's like a ghost or whatever. You just say you are not welcome here. In the name of God, go away, and they will. But think about it seriously, because this is a big responsibility. They're coming to you for help. And if you are not in the mode to help them right now, send them away. So she did. She sent them away. Then her brother dies young from AIDS, unfortunately. And her brother comes back to her and says, you need to use this gift and help people with their grief, because grief is debilitating. So get with it, honey. We're going to help you. And so she embraces her gift. And so I went to go see her in New Jersey, and I was sitting next to a lady who was talking, and it's open seating, right? So it's not like assigned seating. So she just walks up to people if she sees something, or she'll stop and say, what's your name and who are you hoping to reach? Well, she stopped. The lady next to me had lost her son 22 years prior, or something like that, over 20 years prior, to a brain tumor when her son was just 7. So, of course, my father died of a brain tumor, and I'm sitting next to this other woman who lost a son to a brain tumor, and we start talking. So I sat there quietly, and I looked up, and I said, okay, Dad, if you can hear me, you're a veteran at this now. Go get this little boy and get him to talk through Conchetta, because this woman is grieving. I mean, I can't imagine over 2 decades of seeking, right, trying to get messages from her son. And sure enough, Conchetta walks right up and stops, and she goes, oh, honey, I have your son, your little boy. He's right here. Who's David? And she's like, that's my son. It was just like, I was looking under the chair for microphones. It was just to see if they had been recording our conversation ahead of time. But I know she was in the lobby signing books. And, as a journalist, again, I go, wait a minute. But it was really wonderful. And so that woman got an incredible healing that day. And, the stories go on and on and on. But also the healing stuff, like with Carolyn Mace looking at somebody in the audience at one of my shows and saying, you are giving so much to other people, you're completely depleted, and you're not getting any services yourself. So you're running on empty, like I was talking about with the car. When our engine light goes off or our gas light goes on, quick, we better go fill it up. We better go get it serviced. But we are running on fumes all the time. And she didn't know this woman from Adam, and she just let her have it. And she nailed all of her issues. And again, it was an open seating. She didn't know who was going to be there ahead of time. She just looked at this woman and radared right into her, and by golly, she had it. So I've seen that now happen so many times at these events where it's open seating and nobody has a chart, nobody knows where anybody is, and people will still accuse me of being in cahoots with my guest, of going over the list ahead of time and looking people up. And I said, why would I risk my journalistic integrity to do something so stupid? That's just ridiculous. It's not going to happen. But people still accuse me of it because they just can't believe the other option.
Let's say somebody's out there seeking answers like that person you were talking about with their son, and boy, what a sad thing to be. I've had, loss of a parent and that kind of thing, and that's horrible. But the loss of a child, that's just, I can't imagine anything worse than that. Somebody's seeking, and they're seeking answers. How do they separate the wheat from the chaff? How do they find people who are the real deal, maybe, as opposed to maybe some of the less scrupulous people? What would you recommend?
Well, I think they have to trust their own intuition. And if there's one big takeaway that I got from this entire journey of this book, it's that we all have intuition. We all have it. We just shut it down and we give our power away. We give our power away to God or Jesus or our boss or our husband or our kids, whatever it is. But we are all born, I truly believe, with an incredible GPS. And kids especially. I get email after email of these parents with their psychic kids, and they're just medicating them so that they can be like everybody else because they don't know what to do. My son, incredibly intuitive, and I'll share this story with you. When he was 2, he was talking in the baby monitor, and I heard him talking, and I ran up there. I'm like, hey, kiddo, what's going on? And he's pointing to the ceiling. He's like, the guy giving me fire trucks, which was my son's favorite thing. Oh, that's great, kid. Now go to sleep. The next day, he's playing in the basement, and he stops in his tracks, and he points to a picture of my dad, who died 5 years before my son was born. And he says, Mommy, there's the guy. And he points to my dad, and I said, what guy? And he said, there's the guy. He's the guy who gives me fire trucks. He's so nice. And I was like, oh, my gosh. So sure enough, he's talking to my dad on a very frequent basis. And, it's pretty wild. To this day, my son is now 11, and he's still talking to my dad. And it's just, the dialogue continues. So my son is now 11, and he still sees his grandpa. And the other day, I was just feeling sad because I used to talk to my dad, 3 or 4 times a day on the phone. And when that goes silent, you really feel it, And so my son says, "What's the matter, Mom?" I said, "I'm just sad. I miss Grandpa." And he goes, "Well, talk to him." I said, "I know, honey, but I can't hear him when he talks back, if he talks back." And he's like, "Yeah, Mom, he talks to you all the time. You just don't listen." And I'm like, "Ugh." So I've been taking some classes. Echo Bodine has a wonderful, sort of seminar on her website. And I was really taken by some of her classes. The Still Small Voice is one of her books that I just adore that helps us develop our intuition. And so I've been taking some of her exercises and trying to build up that muscle, because I believe if everyone listening to this took some time every day, it's sort of like going to the gym, right? If you dedicate a half hour every day to cardio, you're going to build up your heart, and it's going to be wonderful, and that's just beneficial for you. So if we take a half hour every day to try to develop our intuition as well, that muscle will get stronger and stronger and stronger. And I've been doing that. And I also am a Reiki master, and I do hands-on healing and reflexology. And I've started doing that. I got certified back in 99, but I wasn't doing anything with it except for helping the people and loved ones in my family who had cancer as they coped with their treatment, But this is an interesting story. I was working on a woman, and intuition, Echo says, is like something like a plane flying over a runway. It's fast, it's furious, it's like a bird zooming in front of your car. You're not thinking about someone and then poof, you think about them. That's intuition. It's not your ego, right? So I'm working on this lady, and I'm feeling that I need to be by her right hip. I'm like, "I'm sorry, I'm zooming here by your right hip, but I'm just feeling I need to stay here." And she said, "Well, that's actually where I hurt the most." And I didn't know that. Cool, trusted my intuition. And then I see a picture of a little red cloth. It looks like a rectangle. And I'm like, that's just weird. I'm not going to say anything. So, of course, my ego got in the way, right? My mind saw it again. Nope, that's just weird. I saw it a third time. I kid you not. And so finally I said, this is a really weird thing. But I keep seeing this little red rectangle, like a rag. And the lady just gasped and said, "My dad, when he died, we buried him. That was his handkerchief." And it was like his security blanket. I know. And when he was 8, his mom died, and they took one of her favorite red dresses and cut it into a little blankie and made him this security blanket when he was 8 years old after his mom tragically passes. He kept that until his 80s, and they buried him with it. Now, I had no idea what the heck that little red rag was, but it was obviously significant enough that it made her pause. And so that is your intuition. When you get something that's so out of nowhere that makes no sense whatsoever, but it's important for someone else, that to me showed me that we can all do this. I mean, who the heck am I? But my intuition always served me well in my journalistic integrity, and also when I was out on a story, I would be like, let's talk to this person, not that person, or let's go through this door, or let's go to that building. So we all need to just trust our own intuition a little bit more, because I think we'd surprise ourselves.
Do you have hope that this is going to become more accepted, rather than kind of the arched eyebrow that you see? And from journalism on local news and things, when they something like this is reported, the anchors arch their eyebrow, and there's kind of a convention of how you deal with it, basically laugh at it. I mean, do you have hope that attitude in general, not just with journalism, but in general, is going to change and is changing?
Well, it can't really change until it's sort of like used car salesman. You'll never get that picture of the guy in the cheesy suit trying to rip you off out of your head until we get some better used car salesmen. So I think that we have to be wary. It's like but like I said, and like Thomas said, there are charlatan radio hosts, there are charlatan doctors and mechanics and accountants. There's bad people in every business, right? So we can't let a few bad eggs ruin the really, really good ones. And so that's why I'm setting out to do this research, is to let people know. Now, then again, I might have a wonderful experience with someone like Echo Bodine, and then somebody else sits down and they don't have a good chemistry. They don't have a match, or the person's really cynical, which is kind of one of the things that happened in my book. I bring somebody with me, and she was a cynic. She was shut down. She didn't want to hear it. So not everybody's going to have the same experience. I was really recommended this incredible surgeon when my dad had brain cancer, and we went and met with the guy, and he had the worst bedside manner. I didn't want anything to do with him. So I think it's important for people to not just trust everybody's opinion and go find out for yourself. do your research. Don't just hand over your money to anybody who will take it. I think we have to be discerning, and that's the most important thing.
Well, it's been a great conversation. The book is Psychics, Healers, and Mediums, a Journalist, a Road Trip, and Voices from the Other Side. Jennifer, if people want to get the book and also tune in to everything else that you do, how can they do that?
They can find me at jenweigel.com, JenWeigel.com, or also on Facebook, Jennifer Weigel. Now, my mom decided to give me 2 Fs because she thought it was really original, and it just makes everybody think I don't know how to spell my own name. So look for Jennifer with 2 Fs on Facebook or at Jen Weigel on Instagram or Twitter.
Our guest has been Jennifer Weigel. Thank you for joining us today.
Keep doing what you're doing. It's so important. Thank you.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that edition of the Paranormal Podcast as much as I did, and I hope that you will rate, review, and subscribe to the program wherever you may listen, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, wherever you may listen. Please rate, review, and subscribe, or some people call it favorite, whatever it might be. Please do that so we can expand the audience. We always want to bring on new people and new perspectives. And we thank you for listening to our perspectives today. We'll talk to you next time on the Paranormal Podcast. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye. Now for the legal disclaimer. We do not accept money from publishers or content producers in exchange for interviews. However, as with most media outlets, in the majority of cases, we do receive complimentary copies of books and DVDs that we feature on our podcasts. Your purchases of books, DVDs, and other items via our Amazon.com links benefit Jim Harold and JimHarold.com and help us continue our programming. The sponsor messages you hear on the programs are paid endorsements, although we really do like them. For the full disclaimer, go to JimHarold.com, and thanks for listening.